Welcome back, everybody, to part 2 of my book discussion for the first Dutch of the trilogy Dutch, written by Terri Woods. I don't know why I cannot seem to get that out. Anyway, I'm going to continue with the ending of chapter 7 and then move on to chapter 8. So this is going to be kind of like the ending of chapter 7 through chapter 14, the epilogue, and the final conclusion of the book. So back to chapter 7. We know that in present day, Dutch is on trial, right, for all his crimes that he has done in Newark, New Jersey. The district attorney is Anthony Jacobs. The defending counsel is Michael Glass. We have currently on the witness stand Dutch's old running mate, Quan, who is now known as Reverend Equan Taylor because he has turned over a new leaf in life. And he came back from California because he was granted immunity to testify against Dutch. And he caused himself, I suppose he caused himself washing himself anew or washing himself of his sins by testifying against his former running mate in the streets. So at this point, Reverend Quan is on the stand telling the story about the night that he witnessed Dutch kill someone. Maybe this was his first time because Quan really wasn't about that life. The other crew members, they kind of were, but Quan wasn't. So anyway, this is also the night that they met Sugar Ray. Now, Sugar Ray was a man that Craze worked for while Dutch was locked up. And I told you on the previous video that the actor Tyron Turner, I believe, is playing the character Sugar Ray. And Sugar Ray is like this wannabe pimp. And he has his ways with the ladies. So Craze suggests, I believe it was Craze that suggested that Dutch come meet Sugar Ray, because if Dutch plan was to get Kazami's woman to flip on him and give them access to Kazami, because they knew it would not be easy to access a man like Kazami, because apparently Frankie Bono, who is in the Italian mob, if he couldn't get close to Kazami close enough to kill him, then it was going to be difficult for them to do. But Dutch, because he's always thinking overtime and he doesn't think like a Frankie Sabano or Frankie Bono, he thinks like a Dutch. So because Dutch is very analytical, and also simplistic in some ways, first thing he thought was, okay, if this guy has a woman, he's going to more than likely be whatever for that woman. So that's how they learned of the woman that Kazami was seeing, and they knew they needed to get into this woman's head. And that's what made Craze think about Sugar Ray, because Sugar Ray is the ladies' man. And they figured if anyone could get in her head, inside her head, to convince her to flip on Kazami, it would definitely be Sugar Ray. On the witness stand, Quan tells the story about how they met Sugar Ray. And basically, Dutch gave his proposal to Sugar Ray in regards to what they were planning on doing and how they could use him in the process. Dutch gave Sugar Ray $2,000. Now, Sugar Ray, like everyone else, was yeah, I'm not sure that's going to work, and I don't believe you. He didn't really They were a lot younger. It seemed like the character Sugar Ray was a lot older than they were, so I feel like he kind of laughed them off like these kids. But Dutch basically told him, like, okay, here's $2,000, like, we're serious. So Sugar Ray proposed to them, okay, if you're serious, you got to figure out a way to get this female. And by the way, her name is Simone, this is Kazami's girl. Her name is Simone. Sugar Ray says, you all need to figure out a way to get Simone in a emotional storm where she pulls away, she disattaches herself from Kazami, and she falls into Sugar Ray's arms. And Sugar Ray consoles her and basically gets her sprung. So he said to them, they was like, okay, well, how do we do that? And he's like, I don't know, kill her parents or something like that, or kill her father, I think he said. So he did not genuinely believe that Dutch would do this, but Dutch told him, okay, think about helping us, and I'll give you my BMW or something like that. I don't know. It was something he kind of wagered his BMW, but he was like, I'll wager my BMW if we don't go through with this. I believe that was pretty much what the book was saying. And Sugar Ray felt like for certain he was going to get that BMW. He did take the $2,000, but he also thought for certain he would get the BMW because of the fact that he did not believe that Dutch would go out and kill this young lady's father. And sure enough, Dutch took that ideal and ran with it. So Dutch, Craze, and Quan ended up at the home of Simone's parents, and the mother and the father was home, and Quan was like praying that they weren't home when they were knocking at the door, but unfortunately they were. And the way they set it up was Dutch showed up at the door with some fried chicken and claimed that they were friends of Simone. And when the mother came to the door, she's like, well, who are you? I didn't expect you on. And Dutch is like, well, Simone didn't tell you we were on our way. She told us to come by and drop this chicken off to you. And she's like, well, that is typical Simone. Simone always got something going on and forget to tell me. And the mother's like, you said fried chicken? Woo, child, I bet she regret getting that fried chicken. So she wound up opening the door for that chicken. I don't even know if it really was real chicken. I'm kind of curious myself. But anyway, that's beside the point. So they come in, they pull out their guns, they see the father, and they kill the father. Long story short, they end up killing the father, and they basically drill into the mother's head and let her know, make sure you understand that your daughter Simone and her association with Kazami is the reason why her father is going to die tonight. So that stuck with the mother, and once they committed their crime and left, and mind you, it shook the hell out of Quan. He couldn't believe how cold Dutch could be, and it scared the hell out of him. And that was it for crime for Quan. You know, that's after that whole thing happened, that's when he told Dutch he was leaving, and Dutch gave him the money to go to California. But of course he came back ultimately because in present day he is testifying in the court. But going back to that situation, when that occurred, they told the mother this. So when Simone went to the house and found out her father was killed, the mother was actually committed to a psych ward because the whole situation just drove her crazy. It was just a crazy situation, and it drove her crazy. So when Simone would visit her mother did not want anything to do with her. Her mother blamed her because, of course, that's what Dutch said. Dutch told her, your daughter Simone and her association with Kazami is the reason why her father is being killed. So the mother made sure she relayed that message back to Simone. That whole situation and the disconnect between her and her mother, and that feeling of guilt being placed upon her, and Kazami's name being mentioned, drove a wedge between Simone and Kazami, conveniently, just like Sugar Ray said it would. And Sugar Ray stepped in with his cape on, and he became close with Simone and got her sprung. And so Kazami was still trying to get Simone back, but at this point, Simone was now pretty much putty in Sugar Ray's hand, and therefore he began to get inside information from her, get her trust, learn more about Kazami. And once he got that information, he was able to pass that information off to Dutch and his crew. So once Sugar Ray successfully got into the mind and bed of Simone, he called Dutch and Craze back over. At this point, Quan is gone. Quan is no longer a part of the group. Now, mind you, this is in the past. In the present day, Quan was on the witness stand telling the story. So anyway, once this occurred, he invited Craze and Dutch back over to talk business with them. At this point, because Sugar Ray understood his position, because he knew ultimately he had the information they needed to take Kazami down, he renegotiated the terms of the contract. Instead of taking whatever cash that Dutch was willing to offer, Sugar Ray was being greedy and now demanding 50-50. He wanted 50% of whatever they were getting from Kazami. I guess maybe 50% of the organization, 50% of whatever possessions they would basically commandeer of Kazami once they took him out, eliminated him from the entire scenario. So Dutch and Craze, it was like, really? Like, no, he didn't, but he did. And he knew that Sugar Ray was being being greedy, but at the same time, in that moment, they understood they needed Sugar Ray because, of course, Sugar Ray held the keys to Simone. He held the information to get them inside the house of Kazami and get them close enough to Kazami to even eliminate them. So at that point, Dutch did agree to the terms that Sugar Ray laid out, which was 50-50. But they're like, okay, well, how can we be sure you aren't going to double cross us? Because you could be trying to double cross us for Simone, and you and Simone ride off in the sunset after we do all the dirty work. Well, Sugar Ray basically explained if that was the case, he could have been killed them and did that. And they're like, yeah, that's true. That's true. So with that being said, they felt like they could still trust Sugar Ray, even though he was being greedy. And on top of it, y'all, Sugar Ray decided he didn't even want Simone and that he had her thinking that they were going to leave town together. But he asked Dutch, was it okay if he could eliminate Simone right along with Kazami? And I'm just like, wow, really? And he said basically because he felt like if Kazami couldn't trust his woman, why would he want a woman that another man can't trust? And that was jacked up. That was really jacked up. Also, too, the book mentioned how during this entire situation, it made Dutch emotionally cold to women as well, because he learned from the situation between Simone and Kazami that some females will literally trick males that they claim to be loyal to in order to get what they want. So he never wanted to find himself being vulnerable enough to a female where she would double cross him the way that Simone was clearly double crossing Kazami. So chapter 9 was a chapter dedicated to us getting to look into the current life of Angel, where she was now in prison. So I'm like, how did Angel get in prison? Because the last I heard, she wasn't involved in anything. Like, I don't get how she got in prison, but the chapter does reveal what happened. So basically, for a while, the entire crew, which consisted of Dutch, Craze, Angel, Rock, Zoom, and the Zoo crew, they had been running things for a while in the streets. But it ended up being this day where this day that Rock and Zoom and Angel were hanging out with each other, and Rock was actually married and he was expecting his third child, but he had told his wife, like, I'm not going to the hospital to see no more births, because that stuff to him was just too creepy. And they're like, oh my gosh, you can see a dead body but you can't see your wife give birth. And he's like, no, it's a big difference between the two. So they do ultimately end up at the hospital, and at that point Rock had been drinking, hanging with his friends Angel and Zoom, but all of them go to the hospital together to visit Rock's wife, who just gave birth. So Rock's wife is like dogging him out and stuff about why he didn't show up to, their child's birth. Clearly, like, wow, her family did, but he didn't. And he just like trying to console her. So after consoling her and getting that all done, confronting her family, because they were pretty teed off too about him not being present, Rock, Angel, and Zoom proceed to leave the hospital. So they go to the parking lot, and it's like, maybe it's the woman's intuition, but Angel, out of all three of them, had a weird sensation, and she put her hand on her hip where her gun was. And they're like, are you cool? And she's like, yeah. So they get in the car and attempt to leave, and next thing you know, the parking lot there's lights in the parking lot that light up, and it's like literally federal agents. And they're after them. They're trying to apprehend them. So somehow, some way, Rock ends up getting shot and he falls on the ground. Zoom and Angel get in the car and they try to take off. And Zoom, I guess, is driving, but he didn't get far, basically. So at some point, he ended up getting out the car, and at this point, I guess they hit something. Angel got knocked out in the back seat. So Zoom gets out the car and ends up in a shootout with the police. He kills 2 federal agents before they finally kill him. And Angel woke up to, I guess, being apprehended. So Rock did survive his injuries, and he was arrested as well. So this is how they ended up in present day, being in prison. So at the moment, while Dutch is on trial, Angel is locked up in prison, and so is Rock locked up in prison. And the feds tried to get them to flip on Dutch, and they considered Angel would be the weak one because she's a female, but they quickly learned like she was not flipping on Dutch at all. I also want to say, in the trailer, I feel like there is a scene in the trailer that reveals the actress that is going to be playing Angel. And if you watch the trailer, there's a scene where it seems like there's two agents on one side of the table and a woman kind of going off hysterically on the opposite side of that table in like an interrogation room. And I believe that is the actress that will be playing Angel. Unfortunately, I don't know who the actress is, but based off the characteristics that are described in the book of Angel, I truly believe that will be the actress playing Angel. Another thing that the chapter 9 reveals is that the reason why the federal agents were also after Angel, Rock, all of them, Zoom, Craze, Dutch, is because they had, after killing Kazami, they had what was considered to be called a murderous month in Newark, where they went around just eliminating people who all were a part of Kazami's crew. And apparently it was a total of 63 people killed. So it was a combination mostly of people that were still a part of Kazami's crew, but then the rest were individuals who thought they were going to take over Kazami's spot. And during this time that Dutch and every one of his members of his clique were free, Dutch began to buy up real estate. He had gotten into acquiring clubs, bars, restaurants. He created like some of these bars, clubs / restaurants were like an all-in-one, where also inside was hidden gambling spots as well. And he spent a lot of time there. And he also made Angel like one of the people inside of these spots, where she no longer had to deal with drugs, which I guess she didn't like to deal with. She was more so of kind of like a spy in the club, where these gangsters from the city, I guess, all around or whatever, that would visit these spots, hole in the walls or whatever they were, she would be the ears to the wall, so to speak. She would be the one to collect information on them. So what Angel did was acquire other females who I guess were very attractive and that could really get the attention of these men. She acquired them and she called them Angels Charlies. Instead of Charlie's Angels, she called them Angels Charlies. So these Charlies were very attractive women who she paid to either manipulate the men, trick the men, sleep with the men, get information out of the men, so that it would give Dutch and his crew always a one leg up on what was happening in the street. Until this point, Angel was the only female that Dutch trusted. Dutch had pretty much sworn that he was not going to interact with women that he worked closely with, although there was a part of him that was physically attracted to Angel. He did end up throwing Angel a 21st birthday party that was like really extravaganza. I wrote down the guest list here. Apparently in attendance was Mike Tyson, Craig Mack, rest his soul, Heavy D, rest his soul, Faith Evans, and the Wu-Tang Clan. So she had this pretty big extravagant party and because Dutch is so respected and so is his crew, many of like the individuals that's part of their whole organization came there and gifted her with money and a whole bunch of lavish gifts. And that night she was pretty drunk, so was Dutch or whatever the case may be. Nothing happened, calm down. But Angel did express that she wanted to have a physical experience with Dutch, and it didn't happen though. But what she said was he was the only man she had ever felt that way about, because mind you, she is a lesbian. And Dutch, he was very guarded with his heart with women. It was always wham bam, thank you ma'am, but he never had really any woman that he would consider marrying or really being long term with. And this changed for him because he wound up meeting this woman or young lady or young woman by the name of Nina. And so did Angel. So Angel knew that this particular woman was able to penetrate Dutch's heart in a way that she even wasn't able to do so. So that brings us to chapter 9, where now the book introduces us to a character by the name of Nina. So Dutch first met Nina at one of his gambling spots. I guess she was sitting down playing spades for some money, and her partner, which was her friend Tamika that she was there with, had got up and left. I forgot why, but Dutch ended up spotting Nina, and he just was taken away by her. Now, this is someone who has had his share of women, given his ranks in the streets. He doesn't have a problem for the most part getting women, but this particular young lady caught his eye. And so he sits down and tells her he could take her spot, take the spot of the friend, but he hadn't played spades in like forever. So he knew he was full of crap, but he was willing to say whatever to get close to her. So meanwhile, the opposition at the table that Nina is playing against, they know who Dutch is, and they kind of tense up because now he's the guy that's on the opposite side is wondering like, okay, crap, you know, this is Dutch. Does she not know who this is? You know, clearly they're in his establishment and he knows who Dutch is, and he's just trying to figure out, is he going to throw the game because he don't want to get killed tonight, or is he going to continue to play? So he's all nervous thinking about that. Meanwhile, Nina doesn't know who Dutch is, and she's like hoping Dutch wins the game, that Dutch knows how to really play because he's volunteering to take the spot of her friend. And this is her money. She works in the morning, like she works a 9 to 5. You know, she's just trying to figure out a way to get some more money, and she's doing so by playing spades. Unfortunately, they end up losing the game because Dutch doesn't know how to play. And the other guy, he was hesitant, but he took the 500 anyway that was waged, that she ended up wagering. I guess her and her friend wagered $250 apiece. So she was very upset with Dutch. She was kind of dogging him and stuff. Again, she doesn't know who Dutch is, and that's, I think, for Dutch in that moment, that was appealing to him because of the fact that he was probably so used to having so many people, male and female, treat him like royalty or tiptoe around him and not be honest with him and how they really felt about him based off of his ranks and based off the fact that they feared him. But here she was, a woman, an attractive woman to him, that wasn't afraid to speak her mind about how she felt about him in that moment because she didn't even know who he was. And I think for him, that was refreshing to be around someone who not only challenged him and that was attractive, but also someone that just genuinely didn't know who he was, and he didn't have to pretend to be something. You know, he didn't have to, he may have felt like he could let his guard down, which is something he was not used to doing with women, especially after the whole Kazami and Simone situation that made him swear off ever having an intimate relationship on that level out of fear of being betrayed by the opposite sex. So Nina, upset that she lost, just stormed away. And Dutch was like, shoot, you know, he got to go after her. He didn't even get her number or anything. So meanwhile, Nina's looking for her friend Tamika. Tamika catches up with Nina. Nina's like, you owe me $250 because you made us lose that game. So Tamika's like, whatever, okay, you need to lighten up, loosen up or whatever. And Nina's like, well, I work for a living. You know, I don't be out here tricking like you do for some money. And Tamika's like, whatever. And so Dutch ends up catching up with them. Now, Dutch recognizes Tamika. Tamika definitely recognizes Dutch. But apparently Tamika was maybe someone that one of his homeboys, maybe Craze or Rock, used to mess around with. So that's how he recognizes Tamika. Tamika knows Dutch because who doesn't know Dutch other than Nina? So Dutch is like trying to give Nina back the $500, and Nina's like, no, that's not your money. My money was lost at the table. And she basically didn't want nothing to do with Dutch. I can't even remember if she took the money or not, but Dutch wanted to get to know her further, and she just declined. So I guess eventually Dutch ended up getting Nina's number from Tamika. Meanwhile, Nina did not it's not that she didn't like Dutch, she just did not trust him. And what was revealed in the book is that she lost her brother because her brother was some sort of hustler as well out here, I guess, in that drug life or whatever. And he unfortunately was killed in front of her mother. So when that occurred, and I think her brother was only 16. So when that occurred, she had promised, out of the respect of her brother's legacy, that she would never get herself involved in that life or get involved with someone that is a part of that life. She wanted to honor her brother's life by living her life the legitimate way and staying away from that kind of life, which, you know, rightfully so. It makes sense. So even though she was attracted to Dutch, she had to play it off like she wasn't, and she did her best to shut him out her life. But one day, I guess she went to work, and Dutch did his research. Well, first and foremost, he tried to call her. He did get her on the phone, but she had explained like she just got out of a relationship. She didn't want to talk to him. Then he caught up with her at her job. I think he gave it maybe some weeks or some days or so, but he ended up catching up with her at her bank job, and he came in with like this bag, and she's like, okay, what do you want? And he's like telling her, listen, just give me a chance to at least get to know you or get you out my mind. Let's get together, or you can count this money in this bag, which is like, I think he said $2,000 in pennies or something like that. I don't know, $200 in pennies or something. And he told her, you can count these pennies. You can choose either option. You can either take the time to get to know me, let me take you out on a date, or I'll give you these pennies to count in the bank. And she's like, well, you got to have an account at this bank for me to count your pennies and wrap them and deposit them into your account. He's like, I just opened up one. So she's like laughing. She think it's hilarious. And sure enough, she's like, okay, fine. We'll go on a date, because she's not about to count those pennies. So she's like, okay, fine. She agrees to go out on a date with him. But she basically still controls the wheel by saying, on my terms, though. On my terms, I pick and choose the time and the date and the place, which she ultimately did. So because she did not want to risk anything happening to her while with Dutch, because clearly she know what kind of man he is, what is he a part of, she decided to have their date at her house, so that at the least she could feel like they would not be out and about and become a target. So she cooked for him, and he came over her house, and they got to know each other. They spent a lot of time with each other. I think this whole time he has begun to court her after that date. He was showering her with gifts. He would have to do it voluntarily, because when he asked her, she would decline. She was someone that was making her own money, and she didn't want to look like, I guess, like she just needed him. And I think that made him want to do things for her even more. So he still showered her with gifts, and they dated for, I think the book said 4 months. And Dutch had realized like they had never had a physical encounter. And one day when he was invited back over for dinner, he was going to make his move, and he tried, but she declined. And at that point, Dutch was like, okay, this woman, she must just don't want me. Like, dude, first of all, heck, you didn't propose or nothing. You're trying to get some, you ain't trying to marry her. But anyway, that's my whole pet peeve with folks in our generation, or actually that was people back from the 80s, but anyway, in like the early 90s. But anyway, the point is, she didn't allow him to do anything with her. And instead, she took him to a mural, not that far by from her home, that was a mural of her brother. And she explained to him why she had to take things slow with him, why she felt like, this couldn't go any further, because she needed to honor her brother's legacy based off the way he was killed. It did not make sense for her to end up in the exact same situation. How dare her cut her own life short by walking into a trap, basically, with someone that is living a similar lifestyle that her brother did, and his life got cut short. So what sense would it make for her to do the same thing? At least she can do is live for her brother that unfortunately was no longer living. And Dutch, while he was empathetic, he understood, he was sympathetic about the situation, about her, and understanding why she felt the way she did and had to disconnect from him, it still didn't stop the fact that he really cared for her and he really liked her. So even though he was attempting to reach out to her and stuff, she completely cut ties with him, because she could not go any further with him, knowing the kind of life that he was leading. So now we are at chapter 11, and this is when we have a former detective of their PD, Detective O'Neill. I didn't get his first name. So yeah, Detective O'Neill, he takes the witness stand. DA Anthony Jacobs calls Detective O'Neill to the witness stand. Now this detective puts on he may not even be putting on a show, but it's basically in the book painted out as if it's a very dramatic show of him basically willing himself up to the witness stand and climbing, I guess, or whatever, into the witness spot or whatever. But basically he has no legs and he only has one eye. And we soon learn why that is. So Detective O'Neill is very angry, very upset with Dutch. He does not like Dutch with a passion. So I'm like, who is this detective? I'm thinking to myself, well, he probably was just a cop that was just trying to take down Dutch's organization. But I was trying to put that together, because seeing as Dutch was technically under the protection of Fat Tony when it came to law enforcement, I still couldn't figure out who is this Detective O'Neill and how does he come into play. Well, the chapter would soon reveal that. So Detective O'Neill starts giving his testimony, and he says he spent 23 years at the police department, and he basically, was upset because, or I guess upset would be an understatement. When Detective O'Neill takes the stand, he lets everyone know that not only is Dutch responsible for him losing both his legs as well as his eye, but that he is responsible because he sent a man by the name of Bill Blass into the police precinct to blow the place up, killing 28 officers and wounding many others, including himself. And everyone is like gasping in the courtroom, tripping, like what is he talking about? And basically, they ended up admitting into the courtroom a piece of evidence that they had no time to, I guess, I forgot what it's called when you present the evidence ahead of time in discovery. So they ended up admitting last minute. The judge approved for the piece of evidence to be admitted. And basically the evidence was a letter written by the bomber himself, the suicide bomber himself, Bill Blass. And the letter was Bill Blass writing to his wife that Dutch had threatened to kill the wife and the family if Bill Blass did not go into the police precinct and blow it up. I'm like, oh, Dutch is just trifling. And eventually the chapter actually reveals why he put Bill Blass in that situation. Now, does that make it any more better? Does that mean Dutch is off the hook for being trifling? No, Dutch is just trifling and disgusting and vile. But, it did bring some clarity as to the fact that he didn't just threaten his family, Bill's family, for no reason. The story goes on, and it goes back again to that flashback. Angel ended up introducing Dutch to a man by the name of Bill Blass. They call him Bill Blass. So she ends up introducing him to this man by the name of Bill Blass. And basically Bill Blass wanted a job. Now, Dutch knew of Bill Blass' reputation. He knew that Bill Blass got money. He was good out on the streets, and he would be a good person to hire to get some more money. But he also knew that Bill Blass had an addiction problem. However, I guess during the time that Bill Blass approached Dutch, he was actually clean. So Dutch was like, okay, cool, we'll give him a job, and we'll rock with it and see what happens. But he actually assigned his homeboy Rock to watch over Bill Blass just in case and alert him if Bill Blass was using it. Rock is like, why are you putting Bill Blass on in the first place? I don't trust this dude. But Dutch figured he gets money, so give him a chance. So eventually Bill Blass did that. He was working in the organization. He was bringing Dutch a lot of money, but he quickly fell back into his addiction, and Rock tried to warn Dutch. Dutch didn't really listen at first until Rock called Dutch on the phone and let him know that Bill Blass not only disappeared, but he disappeared after he basically, I guess, invaded some of Dutch's safe houses and took just about everything out those safe houses, and including money and drugs, and he disappeared. And so the way they found Bill Blass was Angel and her Charlies, okay? Charlie's Angels, Angels Charlies. Her Charlies were very cool with a man who was actually from Brooklyn, but he happened to be in Cleveland at that present time. And Cleveland, Ohio, right? So he was actually in Cleveland at that time. And they reached out to him, and he reached out to them, to the Charlies, letting the Charlies know that he had spotted Bill Blass in Ohio. So Bill Blass had went from New York to Ohio. Cleveland, Ohio, to be specific. So somehow, some way, the Angels Charlies ended up apprehending Bill and bringing him to Dutch. And so when Dutch got a hold of him, Dutch was like telling him, okay, here are your options. I can kill you and your whole entire family before I kill you, I guess. Or you can go kill yourself and blow up this precinct, this police precinct, and your family will live. And Bill Blass was like, what kind of stuff? And Dutch was like, well, that's what you get for stealing from me. Look what you did to me. So this is your options. And Bill Blass chose to save his family and go blow up the police precinct. But before he did that, he somehow, some way managed to send a letter to his wife explaining what was happening. And somehow, some way, that letter ended up in O'Neill's I guess, presence, and ultimately in the courtroom. So Bill Blass kept his word, strapped up the bombs, went into the police precinct and blew up the joint, including himself. And that killed 28 officers and wounded, I guess, a ton of others, including Detective O'Neill, who was now on the witness stand at Dutch's trial. And when I tell you, the courtroom was like, oh, this guy. Like, I just said, you know what? It's just done, Dutch. You might as well just go ahead and just do a plea at this point. But Dutch remained unbothered. I also failed to mention that when his friend Quan, who was now Reverend Quan, took the stand, when Quan was done giving his testimony, Dutch did not allow his attorney, Michael Glass, to cross-examine the Reverend. And Michael Glass was very disappointed about that, because he felt like if he had a chance to cross-examine the Reverend and that whole story about killing Simone's father, it could have helped Dutch in the situation. But he knew, the attorney Michael Glass knew, that when Dutch did not allow him to cross-examine Quan, that he basically was letting the case go, because that was the turning point of the jurors' empathy. That was their turning point to basically go against Dutch and see how reckless and cruel Dutch is. So it did not give Michael Glass a chance to save Dutch's reputation after Reverend Quan's testimony. Also, during this time of setting up Bill Blass to blow up the precinct, and when that occurred, Roberto, or actually I think prior to that occurring, prior to the precinct blowing up, Roberto, Mr. Piazza, ended up calling Dutch and letting Dutch know that Fat Tony was killed in a car accident. So Fat Tony was no longer. And mind you, Fat Tony was the one that Dutch relied on for protection, because he was like the head of the mafia families around there. So, or the mob families. Is that interchangeable? But anyway, he was like the head of them. So without Fat Tony, Dutch was now vulnerable to the streets. This was an issue because we still have Frankie Bono, who wants Dutch's place, who not only wants Dutch's place, he wants Fat Tony's place. So when Fat Tony died and Dutch found out he was in a car wreck, Dutch immediately doubted that Fat Tony had died in a car wreck. And he would quickly learn after an encounter with Frankie Bono had asked Dutch, like, okay, well, hey, you know, since Fat Tony's gone, you must gonna be retiring now. And Dutch like, no. And Frankie Bono was like, this guy. So that let Dutch know that at that funeral, because Dutch ended up attending Fat Tony's funeral, and that's when Frankie Bono confronted him. Dutch knew that Frankie Bono was actually the one responsible for Fat Tony's death, that it was no car accident, and that the goal really was to knock Fat Tony out the way so that Frankie Bono could take over. So it seemed as though immediately after Frankie Bono realized that Dutch was not stepping down, he started to get Dutch's locations raided. He started to get his properties raided, the places where he had his clubs, his gambling spots. He started to get them raided. And he also got many of the zoo members, which again were the ones from day one that has been a part of Dutch's clique. He started to get many of them locked up to the point where Dutch barely had any men out on the street to rep for him and work for him. And the reason why this was now happening was because Fat Tony's presence was no longer protecting Dutch. He no longer had that backing that Fat Tony had with the law enforcement. Now Frankie Sabano, because he was Italian and was cool with the other Italian families, he now had that kind of power, and he had the power in law enforcement. To the law enforcement, Dutch was now just another black kid out on the street, and they didn't care. But with Fat Tony backing Dutch up, the law enforcement saw Dutch as untouchable because he had the backing of the Italian families. What led to Dutch blowing up the police precinct, or having Bill blow up the police precinct, was an encounter that him and Craze had with Detective O'Neill. So once Dutch locations began to get raided, and mind you, I'm telling you all this in the order that the book has it, so it may seem like I'm jumping around, but this is exactly the same order as the book. So Craze and Dutch found a strip club that Detective O'Neill hung at. Mind you, he married. But anyway, he hung at the strip club and they caught him off guard in the bathroom and he was drunk and stuff like that. So Dutch is like, why are y'all raiding my spots? Why is the law enforcement raiding my spots? And O'Neill's like, you know, face it, you're done. It's Frankie's Bono now. You're nothing but whatever, because they love to use some racial slurs in this book, but you know, he basically called him a racial slur and like, you're going to be reduced to nothing. Frankie Bono is taking over. It's over for you. So Dutch was like, you know, you need to stop. And I guess O'Neill was calling his bluff, like, oh, well, then just kill me, but you still going down. He was like, you might as well kill every single officer, but we won't stop, you know, until your empire is down, until you're done. And it gave Dutch the idea when Detective O'Neill was like, you might as well kill all of us. Dutch was like, oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. Hence why he sent Bill Blass into the police precinct to blow up the precinct, ultimately killing 28 officers and wounding the rest. So now we have chapter 12, which is more so about Frankie Bono's and Dutch's encounter with one another. Dutch is bold, okay? Dutch just don't give a dang. And so he ends up going over Frankie Bono's hangout spot and he confronts Frankie. And Frankie's like, this kid got kahunas. So he ends up approaching Frankie like, you got a problem with me because you getting all my spots rated, and even Dutch tried to actually pay Frankie off, I think $100,000 or $200,000 or something like that. And do you know, Frankie Bono had the nerves to set fire to that money. I could have paid my student loans. Anyway, Frankie Bono literally burns the money that Dutch offers him for peace, for to leave him alone. He burns the money up and tells Dutch basically that he's done. And Dutch he realizes like he can't buy Frankie, but he also knows that Frankie does fear him. So it seemed almost pointless to go over there, but it was kind of like Dutch was rubbing in his face. Okay, you didn't listen. I tried to offer you peace. I tried to give you, some of my empire to offer peace with you. You didn't listen. Okay, I got you. And he leaves with craze. Well, sure enough, once he left, Frankie Bono wound up, I think, getting a phone call and finding out that the precinct, the police department, had blown up. Mind you, these are people that Frankie Bono has in his pocket. But now he learns that they have blown up and he knows that it was Dutch who was responsible. So he gets to see just how extreme and just how murderous and vicious Dutch is compared to himself. And I believe this is the reason why Frankie Bono ultimately ended up calling D.A. Anthony Jacobs to work with him in order to bring Dutch down, because he just was too afraid to bring Dutch down by himself. I mean, he's up against someone who wasn't afraid to blow up a police department. So, it's kind of interesting that this big mafia man ends up calling the police and to work with the police to basically get Dutch arrested. Then in this chapter, we are also introduced, or reintroduced, if I shall say, to Bernard James Sr., who we have not heard about since chapter 2, since he went back to Vietnam. He reappears in this chapter, which is 10 chapters later to be exact. And basically, Bernard James Sr. is now like this out of sorts drunk, and he's at a bar, or alcoholic, and he's at a bar and he's like just talking all kind of whack. Sounds like he has a lot of PTSD. Sounds like he thinks he's still in the Vietnam War. And even the bartender's like trying to tell him like, dude, the Vietnam War been over. We're not at war. But he's sitting in the bar and he sees like the news pop up on the screen about Dutch, about his son, Bernard James Jr. And he's saying, my son, he's going to win this war. He's fighting this war. He's going to win. So it goes to show his mentality of how jacked up he is from what has happened to him in his life and what he has experienced, what he has seen. And I mentioned this in chapter 2, that he left Dolores Murphy to go off and continue fighting in Vietnam to kill other white soldiers. because he felt like it would liberate him. It would not only liberate him, he felt like that was the war he was supposed to be fighting, but it only drove him crazier. It seemed like that revenge or that combat, that war, it only drove him crazier. And now he's fighting a mental war years later that he doesn't seem to be winning either. Not to mention, perhaps if he wasn't so busy off doing those things, he would have been there for Bernard James Jr. And Bernard James Jr. wouldn't be some sort of headlines on the news for him to even be sitting at a bar cheering on in the first place. Another flashback to basically Craze running things while Dutch is in lockup. And mind you, I think Dutch has only been in lockup for like 2 weeks or something. I don't know. He hasn't been in lockup like extremely long. But anyway, Craze had been keeping the streets on lock and making sure that Dutch was still respected in the streets, but there were plenty of individuals who were attempting to take Dutch's spot outside of even Frankie Bono. So 2 of those individuals was these aspiring rap artists by the name of Rock and Roll, and they wanted Dutch's place. And the way that Craze learned about this was, again, by Angels Charlies, who were the women that were involved with numerous men in the streets, and they knew by association or something like that that Rock and Roll were attempting to, or planning to, take on Dutch's place. So before Dutch went to prison again and was on this trial, in court for this big trial or whatever, he had actually assigned or kind of passed the torch to a young man by the name of Young World. Now, Young World was this up and coming murderous hustler like himself, and perhaps that is why he passed the torch on to him, because he saw himself in this young man. What I find interesting, y'all, is that when I was reading the book, the name Young World really like triggered something for me. It triggered a memory, and I realized why the name is so familiar to me. So if you all don't remember, in the first film, True to the Game, there is a rapper that Quadir Richards and his crew, as well as Gina and her girl, they go see at this club. And guess what? That rapper's name is Young World. I'm going to insert a clip right here.
So, who's this kid we finna go see?
Man, his name Young World, man. He next up.
Young World, huh?
Yeah.
Next up.
So, as you can see, there is a character, Young World, in True to the Game. And being that I never actually read the first True to the Game book, mind you, my discussions were on part 2 and part 3. I'm not quite certain if Young World was mentioned in part 1. He certainly wasn't mentioned in the other 2 books. But it's ironic that he is actually mentioned here in Dutch. So I'm kind of wondering, did they extract the character Young World from Dutch and place them into True to the Game part 1 as just a rapper? And mind you, I haven't seen True to the Game part 2, so I'm not certain if he shows up there, and I'm not certain if he'll show up in Dutch part 1. But it is very interesting, like, are these supposed to be the same people? Because on True to the Game part 1 film, Young World is a rapper, but in the book Dutch, Young World is another Dutch, basically. So with that being said, before Dutch went to prison, he just kind of passed the torch to Young World and gave him some ranking in his organization. He also gave Young World this duffel bag or something, and Young World had never opened it, but I guess it was like Dutch insurance policy on the streets that if something should happen to Dutch, say he went to prison for life or that he was killed, in the event of any of those things, Young World had this bag, and he was supposed to use this bag to take over. But Young World hesitated to open it. He never opened it because he knew, or he believed that Dutch would be free. So he did not want to open it in case Dutch ended up being free from prison and would want his bag back. So you could tell, because of that alone, you could tell Young World was not thirsty to take on Dutch's spot. He seemed as though he respected Dutch, Dutch respected him, and he didn't even want his spot. He just wanted the opportunity to work with Dutch. And it seemed as though Craze, who was Dutch's loyal friend, trusted Young World as well, because he teamed up with Young World and Young World's clique to take down Rock and Roll. So basically they end up going to Rolls Yes, not Rock, but Rose, Rock and Rose candy store, but only Roll was present. And they they physically harassed Roll, threatened him and said to him, like, we know your plan. You're trying to take over the streets from Dutch. And Roll is like, no, that's not true. And it's like, yes, it is, because your boy Rock rolled over on you, basically. So they put Roll up against Rock by convincing, or they put Rock up against Roll by convincing Roll that Rock had told them Rock and Roll's plans to take over Dutch's territory. And from that point on, Rock and Roll split apart, and that dissension, if I'm saying that correctly, that dissension definitely broke up Rock and Roll, and therefore eliminated any threat that they were to taking over Dutch's territory. And if you feel like chapter 12 was a very long chapter, that's because it was. So to end chapter 12, we have another, I believe, Nigerian by the name of Mr. Audible. Mr. Audible. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. Mr. Audible. Listen to me. I hope I'm pronouncing a fictional character name right, but that could be someone's real last name. So Mr. Audible, he was a Nigerian who was also connected to I didn't forget his name. I'm almost done, y'all. Almost done. Kamazi. He was connected. It's so many names to remember. So we have Mr. Aduwu, who is also a Nigerian and is also a very powerful man in this industry, who also had connections to Kamazi. And he met up with Frankie Bono, these names. He met up with Frankie Bono to discuss getting rid of Dutch. And Frankie Bono proposed, killing Dutch himself. And Mr. Ottawa was basically like, no, we'll handle Dutch. As a matter of fact, you should come back with us to Nigeria. There's some work for you there. And that kind of confused me. But the way that I guess Frankie Bono interpreted it was that Mr. Aduwu was going to go ahead and take care of Dutch, meaning take out Dutch. But he knew his fate was also going to be sealed, because it was very clear that Mr. Aduwu was aware that Frankie Bono was attempting to kill Kamazi. So even though he wasn't the one that ultimately killed Kamazi, he knew that he had been attempting to kill him. So, Frankie Bono was not only fearful of Dutch, he was also fearful of Mr. Aduwu, which I found to be funny, because for them to think so less of the blacks, they sure did fear them awfully a lot. And that's a whole nother thing. You have to read the book to understand the racial slurs that was just used over just way far too much. I mean, it's always too much. Once is too much. But it's just very interesting that some of them was going out their way to down talk and downplay Dutch and his crew, and think people based off of just race. And they were like some of the brightest people in the street, and not even just some of the brightest. They were brighter than the ones that was talking down about them because of the color of their skin. Like, they literally couldn't think of nothing else to get them on, so they tried to get them on the color of their skin. Little did they know that's nothing to be ashamed of either. So it's ridiculous. But anyway, that is how chapter 12 ends. So chapter 13 moves on to the closing statements. Now, for some reason, in attendance in the courtroom is Frankie Bono. I don't know why I can't get his name right, but Frankie Bono is in the courtroom, and even he doesn't know why he's there. But I guess he just wanted to see Dutch get sentenced himself. And at this point, it's looking like for sure Dutch is not getting out of this, and at the least he's going to get like a very, very long time in jail, if not life. So DA Anthony Jacobs is feeling himself, because he's done a great job with the witnesses, and really getting into the jurors' emotions in regards to the things that Dutch has done. So in his mind, for certain, Dutch is not going to get off that easily. Also, it's worth mentioning that there's a moment where District Attorney Anthony Jacobs looks out into the the individuals who are there witnessing everything, what are they called when they sit there and spectate, the spectators in the courtroom? He looks out at them and realizes like it's a lot of elderly women in there, and he just automatically assumed those are possibly mothers of the victims of Dutch. So, but he just brushes it off, and I thought that was kind of interesting that the book mentioned that. And I brushed it off like the district attorney brushed it off. So basically, Michael Glass goes first with his closing argument, his closing statement in regards to the case, and his argument or his closing statement was that he felt like District Attorney Anthony Jacobs did not present any credible witnesses. Most of his witnesses had criminal backgrounds themselves. He felt like the evidence that was presented was not admissible in court. It was all circumstantial. So that was like his argument, and he felt like he knew Dutch would burn because Dutch did not really allow him to do his job, especially when Dutch stopped him from cross-examining Reverend Kwan. But at the end of the day, he wanted to still carry himself with pride in what he does because it could still build his career. This was going to be notoriety for him and help boost his career. So he still wanted to finish strong. Meanwhile, District Attorney Anthony Jacobs delivered his dramatic speech and really painted the picture that Dutch is a murderer and needs to be taken off the street. So then Dutch asks his attorney to request to the judge that he gets a chance to speak, and at this point the judge is over Dutch too and doesn't like Dutch. So he's like thinking Dutch is about to plead for his life. So everyone who doesn't like Dutch in the courtroom and despise him are just kind of smirking on the inside thinking, oh, he's going to beg for his life and we about to show him because he's not about to get released today, but let him beg for his life. And they just don't know Dutch. So Dutch stands up to speak, and basically Dutch said, I know you all have, feel some type of way about me, and I know y'all think I'm standing up to plead my case and beg for my life and throw myself at the mercy of the court. But I'm here to tell you all. And then he basically he flips everybody off. Like he tells everybody, F you. And everybody is shocked. And suddenly Dutch pulls out, I believe, a cigar and a lighter. And he lights it up. And then all of a sudden you hear the sounds, I guess, of guns. Getting whatever sound that guns make, and it was a complete shootout. And that's how the chapter kind of fades out from that point. It's a complete shootout. So at this point, we don't know what happened. We end up seeing, or we know there is a news reporter on TV, and the news reporter is reporting on TV. For some, he's reporting on the radio, and different people are hearing the reports at the same time. You have Angel in prison hearing about it. You have Rock in prison hearing about it. You have Dolores Murphy, which is Dutch's mom, hearing about it. You have his father in the bar hearing about it. You have Nina sitting in her car in traffic hearing about all this. So imagine all these, and Craze, wherever, I guess. Imagine, and Young World watching the news intensively with the duffel bag that Dutch had given him by his side. At this moment, Mrs. Piazza, who was also thinking back on her relationship with Dutch as she awaits his fate. She's pretty much lost hope in the fact that he'll be set free as well. And at this point in time, we learned that Mrs. Piazza thinks of Dutch as like her son. And there was a time when Roberto, her husband, had a heart attack and he ended up in the hospital, and Dutch was there for her. He stayed at the hospital with her for long hours, and Roberto eventually passed away. So before Dutch ended up being arrested, Mrs. Piazza alerted him from the information, inside information that she knew, because being a part of the mob families, she had learned that Frankie Bono's plan was to get Dutch arrested and have him killed in prison. So she made Dutch aware of this, and she encouraged him to run, because at this point she considered Dutch a son. He had proven himself more than loyal to her and her husband, and she considered him a son, and she did not want to see him harm. But Dutch said, thank you, but no, I'm not going to run. but I need a lighter. And he borrowed a lighter from her, and that is the same lighter that Dutch used in the courtroom to signal Angel's Charlie's to start shooting. So all these people that's a part of Dutch's life and a part of his circle, a part of what he has going on, are hearing this at the same time. So here is what the news was saying. So the news first began to report that, I had to write this down, y'all, that 9 out of 12 of the jurors were killed. Frankie Bono was pronounced dead on the scene as well. So he was killed in the courtroom as well. The judge, who didn't like Dutch either towards the end of the case, was killed as well. And the district attorney, Anthony Jacobs, was killed. So all of those people just about that were enemies of Dutch in that courtroom, and that could guarantee that he would be put away, or I guess in that moment anyway, other than the Detective O'Neill and Reverend Kwan, who were no longer in that area at the time. They were no longer in the courtroom. The rest of them were killed. So these people were killed. And it come to find out what happened was Dutch had Dutch set up the Angels, the Charlie's Angels, or Angels Charlie's. So he got the Angels Charlie's to dress up like older women, elderly women, and come down to the courtroom. And he basically told them he would signal them by lighting his lighter that it was time for them to shoot. So I guess when he signaled them, they ended up shooting everybody in the courtroom. Unfortunately, it was also pronounced on the radio and in the TV as well that Dutch was killed in this blast as well. And it was a police officer who ended up announcing on television that Dutch was killed. So you can imagine, again, all the people who know Dutch were listening, watching the radio, listening on TV, or whatever, or that's listening on the radio, watching on TV. They all heard the news about Dutch. And Dolores Murphy, she tried to restrain her tears, but even she was distraught. The father, he was so senile, he's still talking about his son fought a good war. Even Dolores Murphy shared those sentiments. Like, they look at it like it's a war and he won, because at least he's not going back to prison, even though he's dead. Nina was distraught in the car because for a moment she had finally decided that she was going to be a part of Dutch's life, and she was going to go through the trials with him, or the appeals, whatever it took. She wanted to be with him. Now she realized she would never get a chance to tell him how she felt. Angel was upset as well because she really did care about Dutch. Rock was he was upset as well. He was actually in disbelief because, they pretty much felt like Dutch was invincible. Young World had the duffel bag, and as soon as he heard the news, everyone in his room, his clique, was very upset. They couldn't believe it because, again, people felt like Dutch was untouchable. Young World decided to go ahead and open that duffel bag because it is what Dutch instructed him to do in case something happened to him. In that duffel bag that Dutch gave Young World was $500,000, as well as the chain that Dutch took from Kazami when he first killed Kazami in that one scene, on that one chapter. He took Kazami's chain, and that was like Dutch's rite of passage to take over Kazami's spot in the streets. Now he was passing that chain on to Young World, expecting Young World to take over the streets in his place. And also in that bag was the gun that Dutch first used to, I guess, kill that robber back at the store at Roberto's, or the Piazzas. So it was like he was passing on the torch from himself to Young World. So that was it, right? So then there was an epilogue and to the book, and the epilogue has something to do with this magazine, this prison magazine by the name of Don Diva, which is actually a real magazine that was created for prisoners, and sometimes the stories in that magazine is written by prisoners. And basically they went to interview Rock, which, again, One-Eyed Rock, who is a part of Dutch's organization but was now locked up and possibly facing life, and so was Angel. I forgot to mention that too. They were facing life at this point in prison. he did an interview with the magazine, and in the interview, the interviewer asked him, like, how did he lose his eye, which he did explain. It was due to some fireworks when he was 8 years old, and he was messing around with some fireworks with him and his family, and I guess it took out his eye. Then the interviewer ended the interview with, now, as far as Dutch goes, some people still believe that Dutch is alive. How do you feel about that? And so Rock is like, well, some people still believe Tupac and Elvis is alive. Because mind you, this is like back in 1998, I think, at this point, or 99 at this point. So the guy is like, but Rock goes on to say, but knowing all that Dutch has done and what he's capable of, I feel like, he is where he's supposed to be. But if he's not dead, then, may God help this world, basically. So that was the end of that. Okay, that was the epilogue. Then there was a conclusion to the book that came after the epilogue. And the conclusion was it opened to Craze standing out, looking out the window in France, out of a hotel window, I guess, a hotel suite window. And he's laughing at the interview or kind of like tripping over the interview in the Don Diva magazine. And he was like, can you believe this? He really thinks you dead. Rock really thinks you dead. And he passes the magazine to, lo and behold, Dutch, who is sitting with 3 of the last members of the Angels of Charlie, because the other members unfortunately perished in that shooting in the courthouse. So Dutch is there in the hotel with those angels, and they're in France, which is interesting because so is Mr. Adowu, so the Nigerian. So it's interesting, like, why is everybody in France now? So this is how it left off. We clearly know that Dutch is alive. He's also with his homeboy Craze. Doesn't look like he has any interest of going back to New York anytime soon. But the question is now, why is he in France? What is in France? So I guess that's where part 2 comes in, and I haven't begun to read part 2 yet. I'm very excited to get into it, but I wanted to do part 1 for those of you who are looking forward to the film. I don't know if the film will be a combination of all 3 books, or will they break it down like they're doing True to the Game. But I did want to get on here and at the least do the discussion for part 1. So I hope you all managed to sit through all of this. The audiobook is actually 5 hours long. So the fact that I was able to kind of squeeze this into 2 hours is actually a big deal for me. But let me know what you all think in the comment section. I really hope that y'all enjoyed. And thank you, as always, for your support. And I'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.